Clayton Reeves stood before Sheriff Silas Dooley's desk, a leather pouch heavy with coins weighing down his weathered hands. Outside the jailhouse windows, half the town of Rusted Mesa pressed their faces against the dusty glass. Their whispers carried through the thin walls like wind through dried leaves. In the back cell sat the woman they all feared. Tall, silent. Her dark skin seemed to absorb the dim light filtering through the barred window. She held herself with a dignity that made the iron cage look small around her. "Name your price, Sheriff," Clayton said. His voice cut through the mounting tension. "I want to buy her freedom." The crowd outside erupted. Voices rose in panic. Fear wrapped around their words like smoke from a dying fire. Sheriff Dooley's pale eyes flickered between the money and the mob gathering beyond his door. This moment had been building for 3 weeks, ever since they found her. The mountains surrounding Rusted Mesa were unforgiving. Travelers who ventured into those passes alone rarely returned. When the search party discovered her collapsed near Devil's Ridge, wearing torn fabric that had once been fine clothing, the questions began. Who was she? How had she survived where others perished? What darkness had she brought down from those peaks? Jedediah Walker had been the first to voice what others whispered. A former bounty hunter with scars mapping his face, he carried superstition like a loaded weapon. "Mountain Witch," he called her. "Ain't natural for anyone to walk out of those hills alive." The woman never spoke her name, never explained her presence. She accepted the jail cell with the same quiet strength she seemed to carry in her bones. The townspeople took her silence as confirmation of their fears. Then the incidents began. Horses spooked without cause. Tools vanished from workshops overnight. Strange sounds drifted down from the mountains when the wind was still. Each unexplained event fed the growing hysteria. Logic held no power against terror that had already taken root. Sheriff Dooley found it easier to keep her caged than face the questions her freedom might raise. The iron bars satisfied the crowd's need for protection. Her continued imprisonment validated their fears. Clayton had watched this injustice unfold from his ranch on the outskirts of town. He'd seen enough cruelty during the war to recognize it wearing a different mask. The woman in the cage had done nothing but survive. Her crime was existing in a place where fear ruled stronger than law. He'd started visiting her a week ago, bringing food, water that didn't taste of rust. She accepted his offerings without gratitude or explanation. But in those brief moments, he caught glimpses of intelligence that cut through the town's mythology. She spoke when she chose to speak. Her words carried education, refinement, the careful pronunciation of someone who'd known better circumstances. Nothing about her supported the wild stories spreading through Rusted Mesa's saloons and storefronts. Nora Thorne had been the only other voice of reason. The widow who ran the general store possessed a keen eye for human nature. She'd survived her own hardships with grace and tact. "That woman's no witch," Nora had told Clayton quietly. "She's just someone who's lost everything." But reason couldn't compete with the mob's hunger for a villain. Now Clayton stood in the sheriff's office, forcing the moment of truth. The pouch of coins represented months of savings, money meant for expanding his ranch, for building something lasting in this harsh country. The woman in the cell watched him with eyes that revealed nothing. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Even in prison, she commanded the room's attention. Her presence made every other person seem smaller. Dooley's fingers drummed against his desk. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Outside, more voices joined the growing crowd. The sheriff was a politician first, a lawman second. He understood which way the wind was blowing. "You sure about this, Reeves?" Dooley's voice carried the weight of warning. "Town's already worked up. You take her out of here might be you stirring up more trouble than you can handle." Clayton's jaw tightened. He'd expected resistance. Fear made cowards of good men and monsters of weak ones. "Price, Sheriff, not a debate." The leather pouch landed on the desk with a solid thump. Gold coins spilled across the scratched wood surface. Enough money to feed Dooley's greed and silence his conscience. Through the window, Clayton could see Jedediah Walker pushing to the front of the crowd. The former bounty hunter's face was twisted with the kind of righteous anger that had started wars. Behind him pressed a dozen other men, their fear transforming into something uglier. $50, Dooley said finally. His voice barely rose above a whisper. But she leaves town today, right now, and she don't come back. Clayton nodded. The price was robbery, but freedom couldn't be measured in coin. He pushed the pouch across the desk. Deal. The sheriff's hands shook as he counted the money. Each coin that passed through his fingers seemed to weigh more than the last. He was selling something that had never been his to own, but guilt was a luxury he couldn't afford. Keys are hanging by the door, Dooley said without looking up. Clayton walked to the cell. The woman inside raised her eyes to meet his. For the first time since he'd known her, something shifted in her expression. Not gratitude, recognition, as if she'd been waiting to see who would finally step forward. The key turned with a sound like breaking chains. The cell door swung open with the groan of rusted metal. The woman stepped forward, her movements deliberate. Each footstep echoed against the stone floor. She crossed the threshold between captivity and whatever waited beyond those walls. Clayton stepped aside to give her room. She was taller than he'd realized. Her presence filled spaces that had nothing to do with physical size. Even in torn clothing, she carried herself like royalty walking through ruins. The crowd outside had grown. Faces pressed harder against the windows. Their breath fogged the glass. Fear and fascination warred in their expressions. They wanted to see what would happen next, even as terror rooted them in place. Sheriff Dooley couldn't meet her eyes. He busied himself with paperwork that didn't need attention. His pen scratched across forms already completed. The sound filled the silence that had settled over the room. She goes now, Dooley said without looking up. Today, no delays, Clayton nodded. He'd expected conditions. Freedom in Rusted Mesa came with strings attached. The sheriff needed his conscience clear and his political future secure. The woman moved toward the door. Her bare feet made no sound against the wooden planks. She paused at the threshold, her hand resting on the doorframe. For a moment, she seemed to be listening to something only she could hear. The crowd outside scattered like startled birds. They maintained their distance but couldn't tear themselves away. Curiosity proved stronger than caution. They followed at 20 paces, whispering prayers and curses in equal measure. Clayton walked beside her down Main Street. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings. Dust motes danced in the slanted light. Every window framed watching faces. Every doorway held someone stealing glances. The silence stretched between them. She seemed comfortable with quiet spaces. Her attention moved from building to building, cataloging details others might miss. She noticed which shops were thriving, which were struggling, where people gathered and where they avoided. At the edge of town, Clayton stopped. His horse waited tied to a post outside Miller's feed store. The animal stamped nervously, sensing the tension in the air. Even the livestock understood something had shifted in the natural order. "You'll need supplies," Clayton said. He pulled a canvas bag from his saddlebags. "Food, water, blanket." She accepted the offering without comment. Her fingers brushed his briefly as she took the bag. Her skin was warm despite the cool air. Human, ordinary, nothing supernatural about her touch. The crowd had gathered at the town's border, a line of bodies marking where safety ended and the unknown began. They watched from behind their invisible barrier, waiting for the moment she would disappear into the wilderness. Clayton mounted his horse. He'd ride with her to the mountain pass. Make sure she had a fair start before the town's fear could manifest into something uglier. Some fears grew teeth when left unattended. She began walking. Her pace was steady, unhurried. The road stretched ahead, cutting through scrubland toward the foothills. Behind them, Rusted Mesa settled back into its familiar rhythms. Crisis averted, danger removed, but something felt unfinished. At the first bend in the road, she stopped. The town was still visible behind them, its buildings wavering in the heat. The watching crowd looked smaller from this distance, less threatening, more human. I won't run from lies." Her voice cut through the afternoon stillness. The first words she'd spoken since leaving the jail, they carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. Clayton pulled his horse to a halt. "Ma'am, this town needs to hear the truth." She turned to face him fully. Her eyes held depths that spoke of experiences he couldn't imagine. "I won't be driven out by fear built on ignorance." The wind picked up, carrying dust devils across the empty road. In the distance, a hawk circled overhead, riding thermals toward the mountains. The world continued its ancient patterns while human drama played out below. "They'll never listen," Clayton said. "Fear's got too strong a hold. Then they'll learn the hard way." She adjusted the canvas bag on her shoulder. "Truth has a way of surfacing, whether people want it or not." Clayton dismounted. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn. He'd paid for her freedom, but freedom meant choice. She was choosing to stay and fight rather than flee to safety. "You don't understand these people," he said. "They're scared. Scared people do terrible things when cornered. I understand fear better than most." Her voice carried echoes of old pain. "I also understand what happens when good people do nothing while evil wears a friendly face." She began walking back toward town. Not running, not hiding, moving with the same measured pace she'd maintained leaving. But now her direction had reversed. The symbolic weight of that choice hung between them. Clayton caught up in 3 quick strides. "This is foolish. You'll get yourself killed." "Maybe." She didn't slow her pace. "But running won't bring back the people who died in those mountains. Won't stop whoever's really responsible for the things this town blames on me." The admission hit Clayton like cold water. She knew something about the strange incidents, about the dangers lurking beyond Rusted Mesa's borders. Her silence hadn't been guilt or mysticism. It had been strategy. "What people?" he asked. "The ones who didn't make it down from Devil's Ridge." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The ones whose belongings are being sold in your town's shops while their families wonder what happened to them." Clayton's blood chilled. The implications spread through his mind. If she was right, if there was something more sinister happening in the mountains, then Rusted Mesa's fears were misplaced. They'd been looking at shadows while real danger operated in plain sight. "You have proof. I have eyes." She paused at the town's border. The crowd was still there, watching in confusion as she approached instead of disappearing. "Question is whether anyone else wants to see what I've seen." Behind them, the mountains loomed against the darkening sky. Somewhere in those peaks, truth waited to be uncovered. But first, she had to survive long enough to reveal it. The crowd began to murmur. Uncertainty rippled through their ranks. This wasn't how exile was supposed to work. The dangerous element was returning instead of vanishing. Their carefully constructed solution was crumbling before their eyes. Clayton found himself at a crossroads. He could try to convince her to leave, preserve the fragile peace he'd bought with his gold. Or he could stand beside her and face whatever storm was about to break over Rusted Mesa. The choice felt heavier than the coins he'd given Dooley. She was already moving toward the town square, her head held high despite the hostile stares surrounding her. She walked through their fear without flinching. Each step forward was an act of defiance against everything they believed about her. Clayton followed, not because he understood her plan, but because something in her certainty convinced him the truth was worth fighting for. The real test was just beginning. The crowd parted before her, reluctant, afraid. She walked through their fear toward the center of town, each step deliberate as prayer. Behind her, Clayton followed, his boots raising small clouds of dust that settled on abandoned certainties. At the town square, she stopped. The old well stood at the heart of Rusted Mesa, its stones worn smooth by countless hands. She placed her palm against the weathered surface. The gesture held ritual weight, claiming space that had been denied her. "You got what you wanted," Jedediah Walker called from the crowd's edge. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being heard. "Now get." She turned to face the assembled townspeople. Her silence stretched until it became its own form of power. When she finally spoke, her words fell into the stillness like stones into deep water. My name is Delilah March. The simple statement carried more weight than any grand declaration. A name meant humanity, history. It meant she had existed before their fear discovered her and would exist after their fear forgot. I was traveling to California with 43 other souls, freed people seeking new lives in a promised land. Her voice never rose above conversational level, yet somehow reached every ear. We never made it past Devil's Ridge. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some had heard rumors of missing wagon trains, stories dismissed as unreliable or exaggerated. The mountains claimed travelers regularly. That was simply the price of passage through hostile territory. Bandits hit us at dawn on the seventh day out of Denver. Delilah's hands remained steady at her sides. No theatrical gestures, no appeals for sympathy, just truth delivered without decoration. They knew exactly where to find us, knew how many we were, knew what we carried. Clayton felt the crowd's mood beginning to shift. Fear was giving way to curiosity. The mystery they'd created around her was dissolving, replaced by something more concrete, more human. "How'd you survive when nobody else did?" Walker demanded. His scarred face twisted with suspicion that ran deeper than logic. "My father was a tracker, taught me to read sign, follow water, live off what the land provided." Delilah's eyes found Clayton's briefly. Something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of shared burden. "Took me 2 weeks to work my way down from the high country. By then, I was more ghost than woman." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching rain from the mountains. Dark clouds gathered along the peaks where her story had begun. The weather seemed to mirror the town's changing atmosphere. "All those strange things been happening," said a voice from the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, a woman who prided herself on Christian charity but practiced it selectively. "Livestock spooked, things going missing." That was me. Delilah's admission sent ripples through the gathered people. I needed supplies, information. I was trying to track the men who killed my people. Sheriff Dooley pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger and something that might have been panic. "You're confessing to theft." "I'm confessing to survival." Delilah met his gaze without flinching. "To seeking justice for 43 murdered souls while this town locked me in a cage for the crime of breathing." From the back of the crowd, a new voice emerged. Nora Thorne stepped forward, her graying hair pulled back severely, her expression thoughtful. "What kind of information were you looking for?" Clayton saw the moment for what it was. The first crack in the wall of unified suspicion. Nora had always possessed keener instincts than most. She read people the way others read weather patterns. "The bandits had inside knowledge," Delilah said. "Someone told them about our route, our numbers, what we carried that made us worth killing for." She paused, letting the implications settle. "Someone in a position to know such things." The crowd grew restless. Conversations began in whispers. If bandits were operating with local knowledge, it meant the danger wasn't some mystical threat from the mountains. It was human, familiar, possibly among them. "That's a serious accusation," Dooley said. His voice carried warning edges. "You got proof of such claims?" "I have eyes," Delilah replied, "and I know my people's belongings when I see them." She began walking toward the row of shops that lined Main Street. Her pace was unhurried, but purpose drove every step. The crowd followed, drawn by curiosity stronger than fear. They were about to witness either vindication or catastrophe. At Marcus Gentry's Mercantile, she stopped. The store's windows displayed an assortment of goods. Tools, clothing, jewelry, household items. Normal merchandise for a frontier establishment. Nothing obviously suspicious to casual observation. But Delilah wasn't observing casually. She pointed to a silver locket displayed among other trinkets. "That belonged to Sarah Williams, 22 years old, married 6 months before we left Denver. Her husband James gave it to her as a wedding gift." The crowd pressed closer. The locket was unremarkable, simple design slightly tarnished, the kind of jewelry any woman might own. "Could belong to anyone," Walker said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Could," Delilah agreed. except for the inscription on the back. To my beloved Sarah, may our love weather all storms. J.W. James had it engraved in Denver 2 days before we departed. Marcus Gentry emerged from his store, drawn by the commotion. A prosperous man in his 40s, well regarded in the community. He donated to the church, sponsored town celebrations, served on the council that made important decisions. What's all this about? Gentry's voice carried the reasonable tone of someone accustomed to authority. That locket, Nora said, pointing to the display. Where'd you acquire it? Trade goods come from various sources. Gentry's answer was smooth, practiced. Can't recall the specifics of every item. Delilah stepped closer to the window. Her reflection merged with the displayed merchandise, creating an unsettling double image. There's more. The bone-handled knife next to it belonged to Thomas Reed. The leather journal was Martha's. She wrote poetry. Each identification fell with the weight of testimony. The crowd began to murmur, doubt creeping into their previously certain worldview. These weren't random accusations. They carried the specificity of lived experience. Clayton moved to stand beside Delilah. The gesture was small but significant, public alignment with her cause. Seems like a lot of items from one missing wagon train to turn up in one store. Coincidence, Gentry said quickly. Mountain traders bring all sorts of goods down from the high country. What mountain traders? Nora asked. Her merchant's mind was working, cataloging inconsistencies. Haven't seen any regular traders from that direction in months. The questions were multiplying faster than answers. Gentry's explanations grew less convincing with each response. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. This is all speculation, Sheriff Dooley interjected. Woman could be making up stories about any of these items. Could be, Delilah agreed. But stories are easier to verify than you might think. She turned to face the crowd fully. Her posture was straight, unwavering. She'd found her ground and intended to hold it. Send word to Denver. Ask about a wagon train that left in early spring. 44 souls bound for California. Ask about Sarah Williams and her silver locket, about Thomas Reed and his bone-handled knife. The challenge hung in the air between them. Verification would take weeks, but truth had patience that lies couldn't match. The crowd sensed the shift, uncertainty replacing their earlier certainty. Delilah had stopped running from their fear. Now she was asking them to run toward something far more frightening than mountain mysteries. The truth. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversations fragmenting into smaller groups. Doubt had taken root where certainty once flourished. Some defended Gentry with the loyalty of long association. Others found Delilah's specificity harder to dismiss than her presence. Marcus Gentry retreated into his store, the door's bell clanging with unusual force. Through the window, Clayton watched him remove the disputed items from display. Too late. The damage was spreading through Rusted Mesa's collective consciousness. Jedediah Walker lingered at the store's edge, his weathered face creased with new thoughts. Years of bounty hunting had taught him to read guilt in human posture. Gentry's movements carried the wrong rhythms, too quick, too defensive. You stirred up a hornet's nest, Walker said to Delilah. His tone had shifted from hostility to grudging interest. Hornets were already there, she replied. Just nobody wanted to look. Night settled over the town with unusual weight. Lamplight flickered behind curtains as families debated what they'd witnessed. The comfortable certainties that had governed their lives were cracking under pressure. Clayton found Delilah near the old well, her silhouette framed against the darkening sky. She sat on the stone rim, hands folded in her lap, waiting, planning, reading something in the mountain shadows that others couldn't see. You need somewhere to stay, he said. I need to finish what I started. Her voice carried the steady determination of water cutting through stone. Those people deserve justice, not just revenge. Same thing, isn't it? No, she turned to meet his gaze. Revenge is personal, justice serves something larger. From across the square, Nora Thorne approached with careful steps. The widow carried herself with the caution of someone navigating dangerous currents. Her general store depended on community goodwill, but her conscience demanded harder choices. "I have a back room," Nora said without preamble. "Storage space, not comfortable but private." Delilah studied the older woman's face. "You're risking a lot. Already lost what mattered most." Nora's reference to her deceased husband carried old grief worn smooth by time. "Some risks are worth taking." The three of them walked through empty streets toward Nora's establishment. Most windows were dark, but Clayton sensed watchers behind the glass. The town was holding its breath, waiting to see which direction the wind would blow. Inside the store, Nora led them past shelves lined with everyday necessities. Flour, tools, fabric, medicine. The mundane items that kept frontier life functioning. In the back room, she cleared space among wooden crates and burlap sacks. "It's not much," Nora said, spreading a blanket over makeshift bedding. "It's freedom," Delilah replied. "That's enough." Clayton settled into a wooden chair while the women arranged the temporary shelter. The domesticity of the scene contrasted sharply with the tensions brewing outside. For a moment they created a pocket of normalcy in an increasingly unstable situation. "Tell us about the wagon train," Nora said once they were settled. "The real story." Delilah's hands stilled in her lap. Memory had weight that pressed against her shoulders. When she spoke, her words carried the cadence of testimony. "We left Denver with hope," she began. 44 souls seeking new lives where the past couldn't follow us. Families, single men, widows starting over, all carrying dreams west. The lamplight caught the planes of her face, highlighting old pain that had hardened into purpose. Clayton found himself leaning forward, drawn into narrative that explained so much about her controlled intensity. James Williams was our guide, former mountain man who knew the passes. Sarah was pregnant with their first child. Delilah's voice never wavered, but her knuckles whitened where her hands pressed together. They were talking about names, boy names and girl names, making plans. Outside, wind rattled the store's windows. The sound seemed to echo from the mountains where those plans had died. Nora reached across the small space to touch Delilah's shoulder briefly. Connection without words. The attack came at dawn on the 7th day. We were camped in a valley below Devil's Ridge. Good water, good grass for the animals. Should have been safe. Delilah's eyes focused on something beyond the room's walls. "But they knew exactly where to find us." "How many?" Clayton asked. 8 men, maybe 10. They moved coordinated, professional. This wasn't random violence. Her voice carried the analytical tone of someone who'd studied the memory for useful details. "They killed the men first. Quick, efficient. Then went through our belongings choosing what to take." The implications hung heavy in the small room. Organized bandits with inside information represented a threat far more dangerous than random mountain dangers. It suggested corruption planning ongoing operations. "You saw their faces?" Nora asked. "Some, but faces change, habits don't." Delilah shifted position, her movement careful and controlled. One had a distinctive scar across his left hand. Another wore a silver belt buckle with an eagle design, details that matter when you're hunting men instead of running from them. Clayton understood now why she'd returned to face the town's fear. She wasn't seeking safety. She was seeking justice for people who couldn't seek it themselves. The weight of survivors' responsibility had driven her down from the mountains. "Gentry's involved," he said. It wasn't a question. "Gentry's selling their belongings," Delilah corrected. "Whether he's directing the operation or just profiting from it remains to be seen." "We need proof," Nora said. "More than just identifying stolen goods. Proof requires investigation. Investigation requires official support." Delilah's expression grew grim. "Sheriff Dooley's not interested in disturbing the peace." The conversation was interrupted by footsteps on the store's front porch. Heavy boots, multiple men. Clayton's hand moved instinctively toward his holstered pistol, but Delilah shook her head slightly. Violence would only validate the town's fears. A knock echoed through the building. Not urgent, but insistent. The sound carried authority that expected response. "Mrs. Thorne," Sheriff Dooley's voice penetrated the thin walls. "Need to speak with you about your house guest." Nora rose smoothly, her movements betraying none of the tension crackling through the room. "Coming, Sheriff." She disappeared into the front of the store, leaving Clayton and Delilah alone with their mounting concerns. Through the walls, they could hear muffled conversation. Dooley's voice carried official weight, but Nora's responses remained steady, unrevealing. Minutes passed with glacial slowness. Clayton found himself studying Delilah's profile in the lamplight. She possessed the kind of beauty that emerged from strength rather than conventional features. War had taught him to recognize resilience in human faces. She wore hers openly. "You don't have to stay," she said without looking at him. "Neither do you." "Yes, I do." Her certainty filled the small space between them. "Those people trusted me to survive, to remember them, to make sure their deaths meant something." The weight of such responsibility would crush most people. But Delilah carried it with the grace of someone who'd found purpose in pain. Clayton recognized the burden because he carried his own version. Different war, same scars. Nora returned, her face carefully neutral. Behind her, lamplight from the front room created a doorway of yellow warmth that made their hiding place seem smaller, more precarious. "Sheriff wanted to remind me about harboring criminals," Nora said. "I reminded him no crimes had been proven." "What did he say to that?" "That proof was a luxury Rusted Mesa couldn't afford." Nora's tone carried dry humor, but her eyes remained worried. "He's scared, Delilah. Scared men make dangerous decisions." The truth of that observation settled over them. Fear had already driven the town to imprison an innocent woman. What would it drive them to do if that woman threatened their comfortable assumptions about safety? Outside, the night wind carried sounds from the mountains. Distant, wild, unknowable. Somewhere in those peaks, truth waited to be uncovered. But first, they had to survive long enough to find it. The real investigation was about to begin. Dawn came gray and reluctant over Rusted Mesa. Clayton arrived at Nora's store as the first light touched the mountains. Inside, he found Delilah studying a hand-drawn map spread across a wooden crate. Her finger traced routes through the high country. "Gentry leaves town every 2 weeks," she said without looking up. "Always heads north toward the passes. Always returns with new merchandise." Nora emerged from behind the counter, coffee steaming in 3 tin cups. "Been watching his pattern since you mentioned it. Man's punctual as clockwork." "When's his next trip?" Clayton asked. "Tomorrow." Delilah folded the map with careful precision. Perfect timing to follow him. The bell above the front door chimed. Jedediah Walker stepped inside, his scarred face thoughtful. He moved with the cautious gait of someone accustomed to dangerous ground. "Figured I'd find you here," Walker said to Delilah. His tone had lost its earlier hostility. "Been thinking about what you said yesterday. About the bandits. About inside information." Walker's weathered hands worked the brim of his hat. "Man doesn't survive 20 years hunting dangerous men without learning to read sign. Gentry's been leaving sign all over this town." Nora set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "What kind of sign?" "The kind that says he knows things he shouldn't know." Walker moved closer to their impromptu planning session. "Like when wagon trains are coming through, what they're carrying, which routes they're taking." Clayton felt pieces clicking into place. How would he get that information? Same way any merchant gets information. Travelers talk, buy supplies, mention their plans. Walker's explanation carried the weight of experience. Question is what he does with what he learns. Through the store's front window, they could see morning activity beginning on Main Street. Shop owners sweeping porches, wives heading to market. The ordinary rhythms of a frontier town going about its business. But underneath the normalcy, tension crackled. Groups of men gathered in doorways, their conversations stopping when strangers approached. The town was choosing sides, even if they didn't fully understand what they were choosing between. "We need more than suspicion," Nora said. "Need proof that'll stand up to scrutiny." "Proof means following Gentry," Delilah replied. "Seeing where he goes, who he meets. Dangerous proposition, Walker observed. Man's likely armed, probably not traveling alone. More dangerous to let it continue. Delilah's voice carried finality. Every wagon train that passes through here is a potential target. Every family seeking new lives could end up like mine did. The weight of that responsibility settled over the room. They weren't just seeking justice for past crimes. They were trying to prevent future ones. The mathematics of morality demanded action despite the risks. Clayton made his decision. I'll follow him. We'll follow him, Delilah corrected. Too dangerous for you to be seen. Town's already stirred up. Town needs to see me standing up for truth. Her expression brooked no argument. Besides, you'll need someone who can read mountain sign, track movement, survive if things go wrong. Walker cleared his throat. Might need someone who knows how to handle trouble when it finds you. The offer surprised them all. The former bounty hunter had positioned himself as Delilah's primary opponent. Now he was volunteering to risk his life alongside her. Why? Clayton asked. Walker's fingers traced the scar that ran across his left cheek. Lost my nephew 6 months ago. Tommy was heading to California with a small group. Never arrived. Never heard from again. The admission hung in the air between them. Personal loss had a way of clarifying moral choices. Walker wasn't just seeking justice for strangers. He was seeking answers about family. Tommy wore a silver pocket watch, Walker continued. Belonged to his grandfather, had his initials engraved on the back. Delilah and Clayton exchanged glances. Another piece of stolen merchandise likely sitting in Gentry's inventory. Another family destroyed by organized predators. We do this together, Delilah said, all of us. Safety in numbers and shared purpose. Nora nodded her agreement. I'll stay here. Keep ears open for any talk about your investigation. Provide cover if anyone comes looking. The plan was taking shape. Simple in conception, dangerous in execution. Follow Gentry to his destination. Document his activities. Gather evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Outside, the morning sun was burning off the overnight chill. But inside the store, something colder was settling over their preparations. They were about to confront evil that had been operating with impunity. Success would bring justice. Failure might bring death. That afternoon, Sheriff Dooley appeared at the store's entrance. His face carried the florid complexion of a man under pressure. Behind him, 2 deputies flanked the doorway with obvious intimidation. Mrs. Thorne, Dooley said without entering. Town council's been discussing recent disturbances. Some folks think your establishment's become a gathering place for troublemakers. Nora's response was steady as stone. My establishment serves anyone with money and manners, Sheriff, always has. That policy might need reconsidering. Dooley's eyes found Delilah in the store's dim interior, especially regarding certain customers who have outstayed their welcome. No law against selling supplies to paying customers, Clayton interjected. Laws can change, Dooley replied. Town council's meeting tonight, discussing new regulations about harboring undesirable elements. The threat was clear without being explicit. Official power was being marshaled against them. The investigation would have to proceed quickly before legal obstacles made it impossible. After Dooley left, the store felt smaller, more vulnerable. They were running out of time and options. Tomorrow's surveillance mission had become their last chance to uncover the truth before official interference shut them down. Council meetings just for show, Walker observed. Real decisions get made in back rooms by men with money. Men like Gentry, Nora added. Men like Gentry, Delilah agreed. Which means we're not just fighting bandits. We're fighting the system that protects them. The scope of their challenge was becoming clear. Corruption had roots that ran deeper than simple criminal activity. They were facing an entire network of complicity and cover-up. But somewhere in the mountains, evidence waited. Proof that couldn't be bought or silenced or legislated away. Truth had its own power when properly wielded. As evening approached, they finalized their preparations. Supplies for the mountain journey, weapons for protection, plans for various contingencies. Each detail mattered when survival hung in the balance. Delilah stood at the store's back window, watching shadows lengthen across the alley. Somewhere out there, Marcus Gentry was preparing for his own journey, a routine business trip that might finally expose the blood on his hands. "You ready for this?" Clayton asked. "Been ready since the day they caged me for surviving," she replied. "Question is whether this town's ready for what we're going to find." The mountains held their secrets close, but tomorrow those secrets would begin to emerge into the light. Whether Rusted Mesa could handle the illumination remained to be seen. Justice was coming, but first they had to live long enough to deliver it. The town council meeting drew most of Rusted Mesa's citizens to the church hall that evening. Lamplight spilled through the windows as voices rose in heated debate. Clayton, Delilah, and Walker used the distraction to position themselves near Gentry's store. From their hiding place in the alley, they watched Gentry load his wagon under cover of darkness. Heavy crates, canvas-wrapped bundles, supplies that seemed excessive for a simple trading expedition. "Man's preparing for more than business," Walker observed quietly. Gentry worked with the efficiency of practiced routine. No wasted motion. No hesitation about what went where. This was a journey he'd made many times before. At dawn, they followed at a careful distance. Gentry's wagon carved deep ruts in the mountain road, headed north toward the high passes, the same route Delilah's wagon train had taken months earlier. The trail climbed steadily through pine forests and rocky meadows. Morning mist clung to the valleys below, while peaks emerged sharp and clear against the brightening sky. Beautiful country that concealed ugly secrets. 3 hours into the journey, Gentry stopped at a remote cabin nestled in a grove of aspens. Smoke rose from the chimney. Horses grazed in a makeshift corral, signs of permanent occupation. From their concealed position on a ridge above, they watched men emerge to greet Gentry. Rough characters with the weathered look of those who lived outside civilization's boundaries. Arms were embraced. Business was discussed. "Bandit camp," Delilah whispered. Her voice carried grim satisfaction. "Same men who attacked my people." Clayton counted 8 figures moving around the cabin, heavily armed, alert, professional in their movements. This wasn't a casual criminal enterprise. It was organized, efficient, deadly. Walker pointed to one of the men. "See the scar on his left hand, matches your description." Delilah nodded. Recognition and memory aligned. The pieces of her nightmare were taking concrete shape in the valley below. They watched Gentry unload his wagon, trade goods but also something else. Papers changed hands. Maps were consulted. Information was being exchanged along with merchandise. "He's giving them intelligence," Clayton realized, telling them about upcoming wagon trains. The conversation below continued for an hour, plans being made, targets being selected, death being scheduled with the casual efficiency of any business transaction. When Gentry prepared to leave, his wagon was lighter but his purse was heavier. Payment for services rendered. Blood money earned through betrayal. The 3 watchers remained hidden until Gentry's wagon disappeared down the mountain road. Then they began their careful descent toward the cabin. Evidence waited below. Proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The bandits had left on horseback, heading deeper into the mountains. The cabin stood empty except for the secrets it contained. They moved quickly but carefully, knowing their time was limited. Inside, they found confirmation of everything they'd suspected. Stolen goods from multiple wagon trains, personal effects taken from murdered travelers, a ledger documenting transactions that spanned months of organized killing. Walker's hands shook as he lifted a familiar pocket watch from a wooden crate. His nephew's initials gleamed on the tarnished silver surface. Tommy's last gift from his grandfather, now evidence of his murder. "We have what we need," Clayton said gently. Delilah was studying the ledger, her finger tracing entries that recorded human lives as profit margins. 43 people from my train, 26 from another. Families reduced to inventory numbers. The weight of documented evil filled the small cabin. They were looking at systematic murder disguised as frontier commerce. The scope of the crime extended far beyond what they'd imagined. They gathered evidence quickly, items that could be identified, documentation that proved the connection between Gentry and the bandits, proof that would stand up to any scrutiny. The journey back to Rusted Mesa carried different weight than their morning ascent. They rode with purpose now. Justice had taken concrete shape in their saddlebags, but as they approached town, smoke was visible against the evening sky. Too much smoke for cooking fires or evening warmth. Something was burning in Rusted Mesa. They found Nora's store surrounded by smoldering debris. The building still stood, but barely. Windows were broken. Merchandise was scattered in the street. The message was clear and brutal. Nora emerged from the wreckage, her face streaked with soot but her spirit unbroken. "Council meeting got heated," she said with dry understatement. "Some folks decided to express their opinions directly." "Anyone hurt?" Clayton demanded. "Just property this time." Nora's eyes found Delilah's. "But sentiments running ugly. Sheriffs talking about arrest warrants, disturbing the peace, inciting violence." The net was closing around them. Official power was being weaponized to protect criminal enterprise. But they had evidence now, truth that couldn't be suppressed or ignored. "Time for the real town meeting," Delilah said. They gathered in the church hall where the previous night's council session had planted seeds of fear. But now they came armed with facts instead of speculation, evidence instead of accusation. The townspeople filed in reluctantly. Curiosity warred with apprehension on their faces. They'd come expecting another evening of heated debate. Instead, they were about to witness the unveiling of truth. Delilah stood before them with quiet dignity. No theatrical gestures, no appeals for sympathy, just truth delivered with the weight of absolute certainty. She placed the stolen items on the wooden table: Sarah Williams' locket, Thomas Reed's knife, Tommy Walker's pocket watch, personal effects that told stories of murdered dreams. "These belong to people seeking new lives," she began. "People who trusted this community to provide fair dealing and safe passage. Instead, they found death waiting in the mountains." The ledger came next. Names, dates, profit calculations, the mechanical documentation of systematic murder, numbers that reduced human lives to accounting entries. "Marcus Gentry has been providing information to mountain bandits," Delilah continued. "Trading intelligence for profit, your neighbor's blood for his gold." The crowd stirred uneasily. Some faces showed shock. Others revealed guilt at their complicity in his protection. A few displayed the stubborn denial of those who preferred comfortable lies to difficult truths. Jedediah Walker stepped forward. His scarred face was wet with tears he didn't try to hide. He held his nephew's watch for all to see. "Tommy was 22, Walker said. His voice carried across the silent hall. Had his whole life ahead of him. Dreams of California, plans for a future." He paused, struggling with emotion. "This woman didn't kill him, but she's the only one willing to seek justice for his death." The transformation began slowly. Individual faces changing as understanding took hold, fear giving way to anger, suspicion shifting toward its proper target. The town's collective conscience was awakening. Sheriff Dooley tried to maintain control. "This is all speculation, circumstantial evidence, won't hold up in any court." "Then let's not wait for courts," someone called from the crowd. The mob that had once threatened Delilah was turning toward its true enemy. Justice had found its voice at last. Gentry was arrested that night. The bandit camp was raided by a posse of determined citizens. The mountain passes became safe again for honest travelers. Rusted Mesa learned to see past the color of fear to the content of character. Delilah March, once called the mountain black woman in the cage, became simply a neighbor, a friend, a reminder that salvation often comes from unexpected sources. She established the way station with Clayton, providing safe haven for travelers crossing the dangerous territory. Their partnership grew from shared purpose into something deeper. Mutual respect bloomed into quiet affection. Walker wore his nephew's watch and his new sheriff's badge with equal pride. The man who had once led the persecution now stood guard against future injustice. Nara rebuilt her store larger than before. Her doors remained open to all travelers, regardless of their origin or destination. Commerce flourished when built on foundations of fairness. The mountains still held dangers, wild animals, harsh weather, treacherous terrain, but human predators no longer stalked wagon trains with impunity. Truth had carved safe passage through a landscape once ruled by fear. Delilah kept the names of the 43 in her memory, not as burdens of guilt, but as reminders of purpose. Their deaths had meaning because their lives were remembered. Justice honored both the living and the dead. Sometimes at sunset, she would stand at the way station and look toward the peaks where her story had begun. The mountains held their peace now. The dead could rest. The living could hope. Freedom had been bought with courage. Justice had been won through persistence. Truth had prevailed over the lies that fed on fear and ignorance. In Rusted Mesa, they learned that safety came not from caging the different, but from confronting the dangerous. Real threats wore familiar faces and hid behind respectable facades. The woman they had feared became the person who saved them. The mountain black woman in the cage became Delilah March, protector of travelers, keeper of truth, guardian of justice in a land that had forgotten what those words meant. Her freedom had freed them all. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.